God. Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for another edition of 2018 List Week. List Week continues with the top 10 worst albums of 2018. Yes, in 2018, thousands of albums dropped across the internet from these huge viral sensations, mainstream cultural events, and some really lowly records some people didn't hear at all. And I didn't hear all of it. I didn't hear everything that came out in 2018. Which on some level does disappoint me, but I can at least say the 10 albums list that I have prepared for you here, this is at least the worst stuff that I heard. At number 10 on this list, I have placed the Godsmack album When Legends Rise, a record that pretty much serves as a reminder as to why nu metal and alternative metal are currently in the dire straits that they are. Now, Godsmack was not the only artist to do that this year. Disturbed also came out with an album in 2018. But in my opinion, the Godsmack record was significantly worse. I mean, not only were there tons of riffs and ideas on this thing that for some reason sounded ripped off straight out of a Metallica record, but this record easily featured some of the band's worst lyrics, weakest songs, and I guess corniest production ideas in a long time. And we are talking Godsmack here, so safe to say a lot of the sounds and ideas that groups like Godsmack broke onto the scene with years and years and years ago, they're not aging all that well. When the legends rise. At number 9 on my worst albums list is the new Russ record, Zu. Zu is essentially a generic, uninspired pop rap album that under any other circumstance would most likely just be easy to listen to, just sort of basic, something that I guess I would just be indifferent toward. But what makes this album so difficult to stand and unpalatable for me is just Russ's horrific attitude, which is really only something that in the past has been grating for me if I've ever caught Russ saying something in an interview or on social media or something like that. I mean, even though his tracks and his records in the past didn't exactly blow me away, I could say they were at least agreeable. But now, with his new record, Russ has seen fit to pack his songs with the same annoying indignance that a lot of his public statements are too. I mean, granted, there are a few tracks on here where Russ does hit a legitimately inspired point of emotion, or maybe he goes a little hard or aggressive, and it's kind of easy as the listener to get into that aggression. But mostly a lot of what he's saying and doing on this record either comes off as really corny, really simpy, sort of like on the emotional love song side, or he is displaying just this general unlikable bossiness, this pretentiousness, and this demand to be thought of and considered in great rapper conversations, even though he hasn't come out with any groundbreaking or truly amazing music yet. So yeah, there are cuts on this thing that do feel like a temper tantrum stemming from those feelings, and when Russ isn't doing that, he's just pretty much coming out with tepid pop rap that pretty much disproves any argument that he's making that he's great. At number 8 on this list is an album that I was really hoping I would like, an album that I had my fingers crossed for a little bit, and that is the Lil Yachty album, Nothing to Prove. As I said in my review of this thing, unfortunately this is a project that really does live up to its title, in that Lil Yachty really sounds like he doesn't have anything to prove on this thing, like he's putting in as little effort as possible. And I don't know exactly what the cocktail of context is that leads to a record like this. Is it because there are so many opportunities and demands on new and young artists these days to come out with as much music as possible, preventing them from being able to sort of disappear and invent and craft and evolve new sounds? Is it because the audiences of these artists aren't really demanding of them music that is a cut above this quality level? Is it because nobody cares anymore and we're just all depressed? Yeah, I really truly don't know what it is. All I can really say is that yeah, it sounded like Lil Yachty just really phoned everything in on this album. And I mean everything from the beat choices to the lyricism to the flows. So many songs on this thing even lack thoughtful choruses, anything remotely sticky or memorable. And unfortunately, this is kind of an ongoing trend that I'm seeing in a lot of popular trap music at the moment, because there's just so much saturation in the scene right now. It doesn't really matter whether or not your new record is is good or bad, as long as you're putting out something and putting out as much as possible. And that's something we're seeing at almost all popularity levels, whether you're talking about Drake or Migos dropping these incredibly bloated new records with so many unnecessary songs, or just one more uninspired, generic, formulaic, by-the-numbers underground mixtape to throw into the ever-growing ocean of generic, by-the-numbers, formulaic underground mixtapes. So yeah, you could say this new Lil Yachty was definitely a contribution to that. This growing sense of a lack of ideas and effort on the part of these artists who just a few years ago burst out of the trap and SoundCloud scene with fresh faces and cool sounds. Yeah, it's just disappointing. At number 7 on my list over here is one of the more awkward musical crossovers that an artist has made in 2018, and I'm talking about the new Justin Timberlake record, Man of the Woods. Unlike some other releases in the list over here, I can't really say I dislike this album because Justin didn't try. No, Justin and his producers certainly did try, but I think all of them were maybe so gassed up in the process of making this record, they sort of let a lot of ill-conceived ideas slip through the cracks, which is maybe the most polite way I can put it. To put it simply, a great majority of this record is essentially Justin Timberlake transitioning into country music, a little bit of folk music on the side too, and yeah, it's like a totally unlikable Bon Iver with a pop and R&B twist. Not to mention, there are other cuts on here that genre-wise don't even really fit into that category, like Supplies, which are still utterly terrible. I got supplies. Ugh, the whole concept of that song, the apocalypse, the romance, it's really just a mess. It's records like this that come from artists with extremely high budgets and profiles that really just make me sit and scratch my head at how the music industry functions. Like, how many people did this album have to go through, and nobody said, like, you know what? No, this is a bad idea. Justin Timberlake trying to fuse the sounds of trap and country over a series of really uninspired and boring and unlikable songs. Yeah, I think we're gonna do a pass on that. So yeah, in short, I will say Justin Timberlake trying to make the genre crossover that he did on this record one of the hottest messes of the year. At number 6 is an album whose popularity still perplexes me to this day, and that is the new Lil Baby and Gunna record, Drip Harder. There are very few auto-tune trap records this year that I could say were as uninspired as this one, completely lacking on the lyrical front, on the instrumental front, on the melodic front too, because many of these records do involve singing, and Lil Baby and Gunna certainly do attempt that. Although their voices on this thing are so drenched in auto-tune, any humanity or personality to come out of their vocals is really sapped out of the mix. On top of that, vocally speaking, neither of them really have a distinct style or personality either, as both of them sound like they're doing their own variation on Young Thug's whole shtick. Which, mind you, it's a good shtick. I do like Thugger. Vocally, I think he's pretty dynamic, and I think he's come out with some good tracks over the years. But vocally and lyrically, neither of them are so interesting I would rather listen to one of them over Young Thug. Not to mention that listening to two dudes rip off Young Thug for one track after another track after another track gets a bit redundant. If you're a solo artist, I guess that's one thing, and Gunna does have the Thugger seal of approval by being on his label. Not to mention Thugger has an appearance on this record, so I guess he's aware of how much these guys are copying him and he's fine with it. But to put out a collaborative record by two artists whose popularity is mostly predicated on their similarity to another popular artist, yeah, there's nothing really kind of thrilling about that for me. And also, again, if I have not mentioned on the songwriting front of this thing, there's not really much to it at all. I mean, the only track on this thing that's remotely memorable or even has a chance of lasting into 2019 is the title track, and that's it. So yes, another uninspired, auto-tuned trap record to be completely forgotten within the next 365 days. At number 5 is an album that also kind of fits into this auto-tune trap field, but sort of landed at this point on my list, not because I felt it was generic, but because it stood out as being uniquely difficult to sit through, and that is the new BLADEE record, Red Light. Now, BLADEE is a Northern European artist who's connected to Young Lean's Sad Boy crew, so, if you're familiar with that sound, that style, that aesthetic, BLADEE very much sits into it pretty snugly. And if that's a sound and that's a style that you love, you may in fact love this record. You may have already heard this record. It may be one of your favorite records of the year. And I can't deny that BLADEE has had a pretty decent 2018. He's gotten a lot of big endorsements. He's been on some big playlists. I'm a little bit of an odd man out in not liking this album as much as I do, but God, I just don't see what's so goddamn appealing about it. On my review of this LP, I did compliment the instrumentals quite a bit. I liked how futuristic and glossy and almost vaporwave-ish they sounded. Definitely sounded like I was listening to some auto-tuned trap from the year 2084. But I could not get past the lackluster songwriting and the vocals on this record at all. I mean, not only is the auto-tune on this record lazily applied, completely uninspired, and actually grating to the ear, but it does absolutely nothing to cover up BLADE's obnoxiously horrendous vocals all over this thing. As many of his vocalizations on this thing are kind of lazy or sloppy, very out of tune, and very messy, and needless to say, vocally, he's pretty one-dimensional too. Again, I could see how this record would appeal to some people. It sounds quite postmodern in some respects, and I don't think there's a lot out there that sounds exactly like it, and that alone is going to create an attraction of some sort, in that, in its own weird way, I think this album does have some unique qualities to it. But for me personally, everything that makes this record stand out in a positive way for other people sort of works against it for me. At number 4 on my list over here is a record that really hurts to place on this list because this is a guy I see as immensely talented and played a pivotal role in what I thought was one of the best bands of the 90s and the 2000s. I'm talking, of course, about the new Tom Morello record, guitarist Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine fame. He has dropped this new record called The Atlas Underground, and it's a total friggin' mess. Tom Morello here essentially trying to come through with his own brand of like guitar-driven rock and hip-hop and EDM with like woke lyrics and a lot of guest rappers and singers. The only common thread linking a lot of these songs together is just Tom Morello's guitar, because this thing switches up stylistically that often. You have kind of these glossy female pop singers on this thing, rappers like Vic Mensa, dudes like Steve Aoki, people who you would never think would cross paths with Tom Morello, and yet here they are. Oh God. And the songs are so bad. God, they're so bad. And Tom's playing is applied into these super glossy, pristine, sanitary instrumentals in like the tackiest, most unlikable way. The rawness and the revolutionary ideas and sounds that were so exciting in his and Rage's early music is just not here on this record at all. And he's really just like boiling his talents down in the most reductive and unlikable way. What's amazing is how top to bottom bad this record is. Even tracks that you would think that, you know, could go over pretty well, especially given that Tom Morello is no stranger to hip-hop. He's worked with hip-hop artists in the past. The Lead Poisoning closer on this thing with RZA and GZA, names that I think back in the 90s you would have been excited to hear on the same record. RZA and GZA and Tom Morello working on a track together would have been amazing. But in 2018, it's enough to make you go back and question whether or not any of the music you listened to in your childhood, was it really ever good? God, and Marcus Mumford is on this thing too. Just so many guests and so many sounds that really just should have never been on this thing, should have never been pursued. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say about this other than that. At number 3 on my list is the new NAV record, Wreckless. An album that I'm not really sure what I can say about it, as some of my critiques of a few records previous in this list, like the Lil Yachty album, Nothing to Prove, also apply to this, as this album is not only totally unoriginal from a pop rap and a trap standpoint, but it is blatantly uninspired at all levels of music and music production, from the vocal melodies to the offensively dumb and basic lyrics to the instrumentals on this thing. Not only that, but NAV has one of the most boring and vanilla and forgettable and totally just, why do we even need this? How did this man get a record contract voices I've ever heard in hip-hop, period, in the whole history of the genre. I mean, I guess I could say I know a NAV song or a NAV verse when I hear it, but really the only defining quality of NAV's anything is just how robotic and lifeless and just not human it sounds. Whenever Nav appears on a track or is doing his own song, it's like I'm listening to lyrics that were created by just a trap lyric generator, just randomly pulling together popular phrases that you would typically hear in a song in this genre, but somehow slipping in some painfully, annoyingly stupid ideas here and there. When I hear his voice, it's like I'm listening to an old school PC-based text-to-speech prompt that essentially has had some auto-tune thrown on top of it. Dude sounds like a cyborg, and not even like a convincing cyborg, like a human-robot hybrid that you're like, wow, I can't even like tell that you're actually part robot. You feel that human. No, it's kind of like the the beta version that they haven't quite worked out all of the humanity kinks yet. So he still just is operating like this. Hello, fellow rappers. I will do a verse on this song. God, it's terrible. It's really bad. At number 2 on my list is the new Jaden Smith Sunset Tapes project, a cool tape story that is completely devoid of a story. Yeah, I'm just confused as to why this tape exists. I mean, Jaden, as much as I didn't really like his Sire project from a while back, I can at least say it sounded like he was really putting in a lot of effort into that project, and there were some ambitious moments on that record. Maybe some of them went really haywire, but still ambitious all the same. And there were some tracks on there where, you know what, it sounded like his sound, it sounded like his direction. Maybe he still needed to kind of get past his influences being worn so boldly on his sleeve, but I guess you kind of knew a Jaden verse or a Jaden song when you heard it. However, Sunset Tapes is the complete opposite. The budget that went into this project sounded incredibly low. The mix was muddy. The song ideas were scant. Jaden sounded like he was ripping off even more from his influences than he was previously. There are tracks on this thing that pretty much just sound like Brockhampton songs, pretty much just sound like Drake songs. What whiffs of originality there were on Sire are completely gone on this project. They're non-existent. Not only that, but a lot of the songs on this thing are either incredibly redundant or brief to the point where you can tell he didn't really put any effort into the songwriting. He just wanted to capture a vibe and throw a few bars out there and then just like dip, which is a really awful way of going about crafting your mixtape. You're pretty much guaranteeing that your songs are going to be uninteresting and dime a dozen. So if offensively low effort projects were the plague of 2018, this is one of the most prime examples. But maybe serving as an even more prime example is the album in my number 1 spot here, and that is the new Lil Xan record, Total XANARCHY. Yes, our good friend Diego here came out with, in my opinion, the worst record of 2018. And the criticisms I've had for many of the albums earlier on this list also apply to this one, but almost like tenfold. The beats on this record are boring and generic. The lyrics are annoyingly repetitive, mind-numbingly repetitive and dumb. Not only that, but Lil Xan's talent for rapping is like nowhere to be found on this record. I'm not even sure it exists, as the flows on this thing are either awful or uninspired or non-existent, as many of Lil Xan's performances on this thing just sound zombified and zoinked out to the point where he's just like sloppily creaking all over the mix. Yeah, his voice gets pretty creaky on this record. Really creaky. If there's one record that I can say from this year that I will at all costs avoid a full listen of, it's this one, for sure. Hands down. No doubt. And I think that's everything I have to say about these albums. Thank you guys very much for watching and riding a lot of this music out with me through 2018. If I had to do it all alone, I would probably be just a broken person right now, a totally broken person. Hopefully 2019 shines even brighter with better releases for us to listen to And transition, have you given any of these albums a listen? Did you love them? Did you hate them? What would you rate them? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, worst albums list forever.